hadith uses. The first one is farh, or just joy. And the Imams of Ahlul Bayt have described this in two ways, okay? And this is very important to know, that Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says that joy is of two kinds. One is for this temporary dunya, and the other is the joy for the akhirah, which will last forever. And he says the first one is blameworthy, the second one is praiseworthy. So the first one is something that's not good, getting happy over something that's completely, when people are completely immersed in this dunya. The second one is praiseworthy, when we get happy over happy occasions. And that's why it's very important for us to celebrate happy occasions, to celebrate the birthday of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to celebrate the birthday of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. These are all very important occasions, because it's important for the believer to experience in their spiritual heart this state of happiness, not just this state of sadness. Okay? So this has kind of been described in the narrations that encourage us to become happy and to notice these happy events in our life. And what has been condemned is to become purely happy when we see something purely for the dunya. It doesn't matter what that thing is. It could be something personal, it could be something social, it could be something even political. And there's an effect of this also. There is an effect of becoming happy at something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we should be happy in our personal life. There is an effect on our heart when we become happy when something social happens, like when something happy happens for Muslims, we should be happy. The physical heart should be happy. The spiritual heart should be happy. And even when something political happens to Muslims, we should be happy. Something that's good. Okay. Now, this is important because the quality of the one who rejects God, the quality of somebody who disbelieves in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will experience a different state in the heart. They can't help it. Somebody who rejects Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they see something happen that's bad for believers, when they see something that's happening that's bad, that contradicts the laws of God, when they see something like that, they become happy. Okay? When they see a tragedy, they become happy. Okay? So the believer becomes happy when he sees good things happen for the sake of God. The kafir, the one who rejects God completely, he becomes happy when he sees bad things happen, or when he sees things happen that aren't for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And the believer becomes saddened when sad things happen in the cause of God. But the unbeliever becomes sad when something good happens for the sake of God. So this state of happiness is very good. There's an ayah in Quran, before I recite this, please recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Marwan, Jafar, can you get me water? Give me some water. So this ayah of Quran in Surah Al-Kahf, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَعَاشِيِ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ. That content yourself, have patience with who? With the company of those who supplicate, who call upon Allah, in the morning and the evening, desiring Allah's face. So this is something very interesting. This ayah of Quran is telling us, become happy, be patient, be with those who supplicate with Allah in the morning and the evening. And the ayah continues, وَلَا تُعْتِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرَطًا. He says that, and do not obey him whose hearts we have made oblivious of God. Thank you. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, don't obey those people who have ghafla. So Allah is making two statements here. The first he's saying is have patience with those who call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have to be with those who call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be content with those who call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes it's very difficult to be with those who call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason that it's very difficult is because sometimes it requires sabr. Not because of the people, but because people collectively, socially, you may be going through a tribulation. It may be difficult. The brother Marwan mentioned just a few minutes ago about, remember what's happened in this 1-year anniversary, what happened in Lebanon. This horrific thing that happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, be patient. Be patient with those who do what? Who pray to him morning and evening. Now the opposite is given too. Be careful that you do not become like those who have ghafla. The ayah says, those who what? They desire the glitter, the zina of hayat dunya, of the life of this world. Because it's very easy to forget about socially those who we should be with. It takes patience, right? It takes patience because if the believers are going through a trial, if the believers are socially going through a trial, politically going through a trial, even personally going through a trial, sitting with somebody, being patient with somebody, even if it's one person, is very difficult. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do that. Right? Be patient with it. And sometimes, even socially or politically, I remember there was this one teacher telling this story, and he was talking about, he was introducing his class, and everybody in the class, he asked, he invited a bunch of people to the class, and he said, he introduced each person, he said, I want each person to introduce themselves. So each person stood up, they began introducing themselves, they began talking, and then he said, okay, class is over, come back in 2 hours. Everybody got upset. They're just like, what's wrong with this guy? So we came here to learn something. He comes and he makes each person introduce themselves, talk about themselves. We didn't come here to hear these people. And some people would come up, they would say, oh, I came from 2 hours away to be here in this class. Other people would say, oh, I live here, my name is so-and-so. Anyways, people were very upset. They went to lunch. So it was 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, they went to lunch. They came back for salat. People were rumbling and talking. And then they said, so finally the people who were organizing the class came to the teacher and they told him, everyone's upset. They're annoyed with you because you took 2 hours. It's an all-day class. It's an all-day seminar, but you took 2 hours out of this all day just to let everybody talk, just introduce themselves. And so he brought the class back in. He said, okay. He said, this is your first lesson. He said, it's difficult to be with people, to sit with people, to listen to people, to hear people. He said, if you want to learn religion, he said, the first thing you have to learn is sabr with people. Okay, so we have all these things going on in the world. We have all these things going on in community, but something is very important. It's very difficult. People always say this to me. They're like, oh, I'm just so tired. I'm exhausted from hearing this. I'm exhausted from hearing this. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if your heart is tired, because our heart gets tired not just psychologically, but it's the heart, the inner heart, the spiritual heart that can get exhausted. You can get completely tired of hearing about these things. It gets tired of listening to the news. And people get tired, you go on the news and you hear, wow, I'm tired of this, I'm exhausted. But I go on the news and people are happy on the news. This stuff happens. And the kids see it too. And the kids hear the parents' conversations too. And the kids see your exhaustion too. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, go, have patience, be around. The solution is be around those who call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the morning and in the evenings. Now it's very interesting because even psychologically, they've done a number of studies. Harvard did a study, and they found that happiness, just psychological happiness, how does it spread? It spreads in social networks. So sometimes we think that happiness is, I have to achieve this happiness by being alone. What they found is that's not true. Psychologically, the way we gain happiness is actually when we're around people. This is why there's such an emphasis in Islam about not being alone. Because shaitan is the one who comes to the person who is alone. Okay? Because the first thing that happens is when a person's alone, this is a gateway for shaitan. Because shaitan will always come and say, you're tired, just don't go to the masjid. You're tired, don't go around people. You're tired or you're exhausted, just don't be around people. And many people say this, right? They're like, I feel like I just want to be alone. Okay, that's the time that the spiritual heart needs to be around people. Nobody, unless you're a prophet, nobody makes it alone. Nobody cultivates their heart. So what happens is that when shaitan enters the heart, and shaitan does enter the heart, as Quran says, shaitan becomes the qareen of the human being. Shaitan becomes the companion of the human being. And how does shaitan do that? The first thing that shaitan does is shaitan says, don't go around people because it's a waste of time. What are you going to get if you go and you pray? What are you going to get if you go and you're around people? It's the same thing. This is the entry point of shaitan. Right? So then you miss one gathering with and it doesn't have to be at the masjid, but it can be with a group of believers. That's the important thing. To keep that constant attachment to a group of believers. If we don't keep that constant attachment, this is the entry point for shaitan. So shaitan waits for one thing. Shaitan waits for a difficulty in our life. And as soon as that difficulty comes, shaitan says, okay, don't go around believers. Because if you go around believers, they won't understand. And so a person then says, okay, I'm not going to go around those who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And shaitan says this is the perfect time. Because not only psychologically I can affect the believer, but I can bring him or her down spiritually. Right? Even if we feel like we're not gaining anything from being around believers, we should go. Okay, I want to read a few hadith here regarding regarding ghafla. Now, that entryway into ghafla, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يَشْعُو عَنْ ذِكْرِ رَحْمَانُ. I'm sorry. He says that وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِ فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ وَنَحْشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى. He says that whoever turns away, but whoever disregards my remembrance, whoever goes away from my remembrance, he shall have a wretched life, right? And we shall raise him on the day of judgment blind. So the question is if we forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what's going to happen to our life? So in this society, if we see people are engrossed in materialism, people are engrossed in consumerism, people are engrossed in forgetting God. And the first step to forgetting God is not being around believers. So when a person first, they make this decision, they say, well, I don't want to be around believers, and they forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the first step that breaks our connection with Him. And when we break our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't do anything. He simply just waits for us. He says, come back. And we say, no, I'm going to not be around people 1 day, 2 days, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks. And eventually what happens? A person's heart becomes very cold. Eventually what happens? We begin to distance ourselves from our daily practices, and eventually what happens is we fall into this deep state of ghafla. So now, when a human being falls into the state of ghafla, what happens? Ghafla in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described ghafla as like the cow. If you see the cow, I mean, look at the cow. Does anybody respect a cow? You know, the cow walks. You see the cow on the 5 freeway, and it's just standing there. You look at it, it's doing nothing. It's heedless of traffic going by. It's heedless of everything. It's just eating grass. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the human being. Those in ghafla are like the cow, because the cow doesn't care about anything. The cow is completely concerned with what? Just what's in front of him. Directly what's in front of him or her. The cow isn't concerned about anything around them. If you put any other animal in that enclosure, they'll jump over the gate. A cow is so heavy it can knock that gate over and it can keep going. But it doesn't do it. It just stays there. The cow won't escape. It won't escape its own prison. But what does it do? Instead of getting freedom, it'll just sit there, it'll eat grass, right? Continue to eat grass and continue to eat grass. So Allah describes the human being like this. You can give guidance to a person, but if a person is in ghafla, if a person's in a spiritual state of ghafla, which means if our heart has forgotten God, and I'll get to the opposite of this, which is intimacy of Allah, if a person is in a state of ghafla, it's not that they've turned away from God, it's that even if you put something directly in front of that person, you can put guidance, you can put truth, you can put anything you want, they won't see it. Let me give you an example. Before I give you an example, recite salawat ala Muhammad. Okay, let me give you an example. If you look on the news today, you can see what's happening in Gaza. You can see what's happening in Lebanon. You can see tragedy, 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 right? You can see this. You can see people's houses. You can see people, how this is affecting children, how all of these things that's happening. You turn on the television, sometimes you'll talk to a neighbor, sometimes you'll talk to somebody, and many times people they won't get it. They won't see it. They'll see a child suffering, but it won't make a difference. But sometimes, and by the way, it doesn't always mean that just because somebody's Muslim, that their heart is not in ghafla. It's very interesting because Gaza is the thing that taught us this, right? You have many non-Muslims. They may be misguided. We might believe they're misguided, but the heart is not in ghafla. You will see that the heart is waking up. The heart is opening up, right? Because they can see something, they can see a child. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said that what brings the heart surur, what brings it gladness, is if you make an orphan happy. What brings the spiritual heart happiness is if you make an orphan happy. It's not for just Muslims. This is why you see people, whether it can be even non-Muslims, they'll see a child and they'll say, no, I have to make that child happy. I have to do something. That child cannot be sad. Sometimes you'll see Muslims, they'll see what's on the television, they'll say, no, they have all these arguments about what's right and what's wrong, and that's a heart in a state of ghafla. When a heart can't see haqq, when a heart can't see simple truths, you see, the fitrat, the heart can see a simple truth. It's not difficult. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is why the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim have said, just tell people about us. Just tell people about us. It's okay, don't worry about anything else. Just tell them. So what has happened during this time that this all happened at Gaza? You see people, you see even some non-Muslims. Some non-Muslims are waking up. Some non-Muslims are saying, what is this? Let me go read the Quran. Because the heart was waiting for something. Sometimes you'll see Muslims, not all Muslims, but sometimes you'll see Muslims. Gaza makes them even more asleep, right? Sometimes you'll see people, they'll be Muslim and they won't understand what's happening in the world. So the heart can fall into deep, 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 deep slumber, right? If I ask anybody, is hurting a child correct? Anybody on any day will typically say, no, that's not correct. You shouldn't do that. That's wrong. But today in the world, you'll see people justify it. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to give us an indication how deep a person can be in ghafla. Like that cow, all he cares about is, he doesn't even care about all the grass. The cow doesn't even go to where the grass is the highest. He just looks where he's at. He just sits and eats the grass right in front of him or her. That cow doesn't even want to go and explore sometimes. That's how bad ghafla is. If the heart dies, a person can go into such deep slumber that the things that matter in life, stop mattering. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said here, whoever turns away from my dhikr, my remembrance, he shall have a straightened life. That person in their life, for their whole life, they will not be happy. Now this is something it's interesting. I get this question a lot. People ask this question, they say, okay, if that's the case, why is it that people who sometimes are on batil, sometimes people who are on not the side of haqq, how come they seem so happy? I mean, they seem so happy sometimes, right? And sometimes I don't get it. Okay? There's something, and the answer to this question is really simple. There's something called hedonic adaptation in psychology. Okay? And hedonic adaptation is that when you take a human being, they've done a lot of studies on this, and you give them something, and they call this the hedonic treadmill. Hedonism means to satisfy oneself with pleasure. That's what hedonism is. And the hedonic treadmill it's like the human being is on a treadmill. For those of you who have a treadmill, you get on that treadmill and you keep going on that treadmill. So what this word means is that in order to keep the human being happy, they have to be on this hedonic treadmill. That means you have to give them something that makes them happy for a few minutes or a few days. And then they get happy, or they appear happy, right? They experience that surur, but surur is that, or that farh, that farh. They experience that sense of outward happiness. But that outward happiness always dies. It goes down. So what do you have to do on a treadmill? When you turn on a treadmill, you have to keep running. You have to keep going. So you need another thing. You need a second thing. You need a third thing. You need a fourth thing. You need a fifth thing. So the person takes a second thing, a third thing, a fourth thing, a fifth thing. Because that thing that you're taking, it doesn't satisfy the soul. So what you need something else. And then you need something else. And then you need something else. Almost like a drug. Right? Because when the heart is asleep, completely asleep, what happens is you can't feel yourself anymore. You don't feel what's happening. So what does a person have to do immediately? If the spiritual heart feels horrible, what people do is they go and they say, okay, I feel horrible inside. I don't know why I feel horrible. Let me go and let me involve myself in consumerism, or let me deeply go into dunya. So they take something from dunya, and this makes them happy, outwardly happy, bodily happy for just a few minutes, a few days, maybe even a few weeks. So somebody they can buy a house, they can buy a car, they can get some money, they can have some illicit relationship, they can do something, they can acquire something from this dunya. But that psychological feeling, that farh, outwardly happiness fades, always fades. This has been documented. So what does the person need to do? They say, now my new car, it's like, I've been driving it for 2 months. That happiness fades, right? We all know this. We all know this. Anything that made you happy, how long did it last? 1 week, 2 weeks, 2 months? Now, if you're young and you see that new shiny thing, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described it as that shiny thing, that shiny hayat ad-dunya. It's that zina, the thing that looks glittery. You want to go to it. And sometimes when you're young, you're like, no, I got to do it. And you think, I'm not going to listen to that. And elders will tell us, No, don't do that. You know why elders tell us that? Elders tell us that because they've done it. They're saving us the time. They've been on the treadmill. So elders say, don't get on the treadmill. Well, how do you know? And the elder gets embarrassed, and the elder doesn't want to say anything. But the elder really wants to tell you they've been on that treadmill. You're going to be on that treadmill for 10 years of your life because they've been on that treadmill. And they're going to tell you that that doesn't lead to happiness. So people get on that treadmill, and then the heart drifts. It starts getting very groggy, and it starts going to sleep. And eventually, when it starts going to sleep, and it's not awake, we need more of consumerism, more material things, more fancy things, more glitter and glitter and glitter, until the heart can't awaken anymore. You know, you hear about like these people who overdose, right? And what happens with an overdose? An overdose is many drugs, you take a certain amount of drug and then you need more of that drug, like heroin or some other horrible drug that can lead to death. You take that drug, and then that's not good enough anymore. You have to take more drug and more and more. But what happens eventually? If you keep taking that, the physical body dies. What actually dies first is the brain. The body will die. When we indulge in something haram, what happens is the spiritual heart, eventually you take it, the heart's getting sleepier and groggier and more tired. What does that mean? That means that if somebody gives you a simple, basic truth about life, about how to live life, you won't see it. You just won't see it. Someone could tell you a simple thing. They could say, and they could say, do your prayers. I don't see the benefit. Okay, maybe you don't see the benefit. Maybe the problem is here. Maybe the heart's asleep. Maybe people say fast. I don't see the benefit. It's too hard. It's not worth my time. I don't feel like going around people. I don't feel like going to the masjid. Maybe it's because the heart has fallen asleep. Some young people say, I don't want to get married. Maybe the heart has fallen asleep. So when that heart falls asleep, and eventually what happens with the drug addict takes so much drugs that they fall asleep, they go into slumber, and they don't wake up. What happens to the human being when they indulge in consumerism, when they indulge, and it's really interesting because the human being can know so much about dunya, so much they can engross themselves in dunya, that they know nothing else. It's only dunya that makes them happy. It's only dunya that they talk about. It's only dunya that they're concerned about. What happens is the heart eventually will die. Just like the physical heart will die with a different drug, the spiritual heart will die. And when the spiritual heart dies, that can't be woken up. So you can bring the most basic truth in front of that person. You can have a child being hurt. You can have people being killed. You can have anything happen. But that person just looks and they say, I don't get it. I don't see the truth. It doesn't make sense to me. So these simple truths begin to disappear. Then what happens is the person cannot make a decision in their life. So when the spiritual heart dies, we then want to make a decision in our life. And then shaitan doesn't come to us because the work is done. At that point, shaitan leaves us. And he says, that's all I needed to do. Now it's done. Now, even if you wanted to, you could not see the truth. Let me give you an example. The brothers of Yusuf, alayhi salam. When we look in Quran, the Quran talks about the nafs al-musawwala. The nafs al-musawwala is the nafs of the human being that deceives themselves. Okay, it is a nafs. It is a spiritual thing in the heart that causes deception. And so many times we think that, oh, I can't be deceived. I can't be tricked. I can't be fooled. No, I know this decision is right. No, I know this decision is the best decision. So anybody can be fooled. When Quran mentions this nafs, it mentions it in two places in the Quran. It mentions it in the story of Yusuf, alayhi salam, the nafs al-musawwala, and it mentions it in Surah Taha, in the 20th surah of the Quran related to Samiri and Yusuf. When Samiri built the calf and Musa asked him, Musa alayhi salam asked him, why did you build it? He says, my nafs deceived me. When Yaqub speaks to the brothers of Yusuf, he says to them, the reason you did what you did to Yusuf is because your nafs deceived you. So the nafs can lead to what? It can lead to the most heinous of things. What did the brothers of Yusuf do? They took their brother. They threw him in a ditch. They plotted to hurt him and kill him. And so Quran has given us this, that the human being, it begins with that deception that the human being has. Then the heart falls asleep. Then the heart dies. And then shaitan doesn't have to worry about anything. Now for the believer, if the believer does not want the heart to die, the believer has to return to that remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll give one last hadith and we'll end here. Please recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So there's a tradition from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he says, now when the heart dies, before I say this tradition, when the heart dies, we become more and more distant from God. We don't get closer to God. And the goal of life is not just to develop qurb or closeness to God, but it's to develop uns, to develop intimacy with God, to become so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we feel that we're intimate with Him. If we ask ourselves, what is the thing that I know most about? Just everybody ask yourself, what is the thing that I know most about? Some people will say their children. Some people will say their family. Some people will say their parents. Some people will say all kinds of things, right? But if we want to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the opposite of ghafla is getting closer to Him and developing intimacy with Him. The hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam is, he says that intimacy is in three things. Now, we can get intimacy to God in three things. This is what this hadith means. We can acquire intimacy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in three things. Through three things. We can acquire intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, intimacy is in three people. One, a good spouse. Two, a righteous child. Three, a good brother or sister. You can get close to Allah subhanahu. This is a way you can get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we use these things correctly. One is a good wife or husband, a good spouse. So the implication of this is that even if you have a difficult spouse, you can get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe even your spouse is teaching you patience, right? It's possible. It's interesting. There's a very famous scholar who passed away. He passed away in the 70s, and it said that, you know, he had a really difficult wife, like very, very difficult wife. And she used to, he's a very big scholar, and she used to, when his students came over, she used to shout at him. And when she used to shout at him, the students used to, it used to be very awkward in front of the students, so they went to him finally and they said, you know, do you want us to talk to her and you know, do something? And his response is, no, just leave her alone. She said, you know, when I go home, he goes, what happens is I go to the masjid, I talk to people in the masjid, and everybody gives me attention, and I feel my nafs gets really big. And then I go home, and then my nafs goes really low. He goes, and he says, maybe there's some khair in it, some goodness. By the way, this is not a justification for wives not being good to their husbands. This is not a justification for, I know someone's going to be, I always get this. I get these calls like, you know what, Brother Kauther, you know what, you said this story, and now, you know, my husband brought this up, or my wife brought this up. That's not justification for that. But we can make that other person, help them develop intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next thing is a righteous child, a good child, a child that's salih. They can bring us to greater intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, that means there's a responsibility here on, when we talk about the husband or the wife, it's the responsibility of the husband to help make the wife righteous. It's the responsibility of the wife to help make the husband righteous. It's both their responsibilities. Okay, it's not the responsibility of someone to say, oh, well, the hadith says that I can get closer to God through a righteous wife. Well, she's not righteous, that's why I'm not close to God. No, it's our responsibility to help make them righteous. It's also their responsibility to help for them to do the same to us. Okay? If a husband and wife are having lots of conflicts in the home, okay, the husband and wife have to look at themselves. Okay? They're teaching intimacy to the children. The children learn what intimacy is, how to be intimate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how to be close, what closeness is, from how the husband and wife treat each other. So if there's high conflict between the husband and wife, this is something we'd be responsible for. This is something we're accountable for. And if we say, oh, it's all of their fault, 95% of the time, I've met with several couples, anybody who says it's 95% of their fault, or even if you're saying it's 50% of their fault, if you're saying that, and if they're saying that, then it's probably more like 80% of your fault. So the responsibility of the husband and wife is on each other. If there's a child that's righteous, we can't do everything. We can't absolutely predict everything. Some, even children of prophets went astray, but it's important to know that the example that we show to our children should be a righteous example. We should teach our children how to be righteous. Screaming and yelling in the home, that's not righteousness. That's not how we teach a child. The way we teach a child is, as the hadith says, the perfection in aql comes through manners. The perfection of the aql comes through the perfection. The aql is in the heart. The perfection of that comes through manners. So it becomes a responsibility for us all to teach our families, to reform ourselves, inshallah. So this is a blessed occasion. It's the week of the birthday of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as he has said, if you make a believer happy, you have made me happy. If you have made me happy, you have made Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy. Our responsibility in this week is to make one believer happy. This is our responsibility. If we do that, then we make the Prophet happy on his birthday. That's the gift that we can give the Prophet. So everybody, use this week, do one thing for a believer. Just make them happy. That's it. Anything you can do. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give relief to all those who are suffering in the world, whether it be in Gaza, in Lebanon, especially in South Lebanon, in Yemen, in other places in the world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not only give relief, but to give happiness to those mu'mineen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal the hearts of any mu'mineen in our community and to give happiness and contentment. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us pull away from the glitter of this dunya, to not allow us to be immersed in it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us basira and ability so that our hearts don't fall asleep, that we have ability in making good decisions. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to awaken our hearts so that we make the Imam of the age happy and we are in his company soon. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi tahirin.